So, good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us this evening for a very, very special Restless event with Veronica Henry to celebrate the launch of her new book, The Impulse Purchase. So please feel free, if you've been at Restless events before, you'll know this, please feel free to post your questions for Veronica in the chat function on the bottom of your screen, and we'll cover as many as we can, including some posted before the event on the site itself. And the event will take place over the next hour. The Impulse Purchase is a joyful and uplifting story of family, love, and hope from the queen of escapist family drama. Cherry, Maggie, and Rose are mother, daughter, and granddaughter, each with their own hopes, dreams, and even sorrows. They have always been close, so when, in a moment of impulse, Cherry buys a gorgeous but rundown pub in the village she grew up in, it soon becomes a family affair. Veronica Henry is the Sunday Times bestselling author of over 20 novels. She was a scriptwriter for some of our best-loved dramas, such as The Archers, Heartbeat, and Holby City, before she turned to fiction. She won the 2014 RNA Novel of the Year award for A Night on the Orient Express. Veronica lives with her family in a village in North Devon and can often be found cooking up the perfect seaside feast or mixing killer Negronis. I want to hear more about those later. The Impulse Purchase has been described as an exquisite story bursting at the seams with summer, hope, and love by Millie Johnson, warm, escapist, and utterly uplifting by Lucy Diamond, a heartwarming, triumphant story combined with Veronica's sublime writing by Kathy Bramley. And it's a review and love reading that really captures the book's essence. A friendly and heartfelt embrace awaits in this wonderfully entertaining and rewarding novel. Veronica Henry is a firm favourite with the love reading team. Her feel-good novels have such emotional reach, and it's always incredibly easy just to sink into their warm and welcoming arms. The Impulse Purchase is a little slice of reading heaven. Wow. Please welcome Veronica Henry. So, Veronica, thanks so much for joining us this evening. It's such an honour to have you with us. We'll go straight into some of the questions from our members. Could you start by telling us a little more about the Impulse Purchase and what inspired this, your 20th novel?
I think it's 20. I have slightly lost count. Like every time I count, it comes out differently. There were two things initially that inspired this story. One was I read a review in one of our local papers of a pub somewhere on Exmoor in Somerset that was run by a mother and daughter, and that immediately pricked up my ears or my eyes, and I just thought, oh, how fascinating, to actually sort of go into business with your mum or your daughter and undertake such a massive challenge. And then I thought, right, I want to spin it one step further and make it a 3-generation, because I'm very interested in how much closer we all are these days, I think, and how we influence each other. So grandparents and grandchildren have so much to learn from each other, and I really wanted to reflect that. So, like the younger ones have the wisdom of the older ones, and then the older ones are learning all about social media and technology and what's going on in the world from the younger ones. And I thought that's really exciting and vibrant and fun. And I also really wanted to reflect an older woman. I just don't think we're seeing enough vibrant, bright career women who are, Cherry, the main character, is nearly 70. And I'm just not seeing those women reflected in literature or even on the telly so much. I think in broadcasters' heads, certainly, 70-year-olds are the traditional old-fashioned granny still. We're not seeing those kind of, if you think of people like Joanna Lumley, for example, who are just still so fantastic. And I just wanted to have that sort of a main character driving the novel, really. It's Cherry's impulse purchase of the pub in the village she grew up in that kind of sets the whole ball rolling. So that's a long explanation of all the inspiration for it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's amazing. So can I ask what prompted the transition from script writing to novel writing? And how did you find that transition?
Okay, so, I've always been involved in storytelling. My very first job was actually typing out Archer scripts for the Radio 4 drama series. I was 20 years old when I started So I kind of say I did go to university, but I got thrown out for not working hard enough. So I ended up at what I call the University of Ambridge, basically typing out Archer scripts, and you know, they would be delivered typewritten by the writer, and then the producer would scribble all over the scripts and rewrite it and cut it and swap things around. So that's really where I learned about storytelling. And then I went from there to become a script editor on Crossroads. Believe it or not, it did have a script editor. I know that seems hard to believe. Anybody who can remember Crossroads, it was a bit of a laughing stock. And then I went on to script edit Boone, which was Michael Elphick and Neil Morrissey, sort of detective-y show. And then when I had my first child, I jumped over the fence and became a scriptwriter and wrote scripts for about 10 years. It's a brutal process. In my head, I thought, right, I want to start a family, so that'll be a really lovely thing to do from home. It's a nightmare, because you imagine, you know, the baby sleeping in the Moses basket under your desk, and, you know, just being able to write away. But actually, it's very pressurized. I wrote for long-running series, so the pressure's on you. There's not a lot of time to get the script right. There's quite often changes that you have to make to the script that aren't necessarily your fault. You know, like say an actor suddenly becomes unavailable, or quite often somebody in the chain will say, oh, I don't like that story, I want to drop that and change it completely. So it's high pressure, not a lot of time. And I just got burned out, actually. And my first love, although I was involved in storytelling, my first love was always books rather than television. And I always felt sort of slightly fraudulent writing telly, because I was still very passionate about books. And script writing isn't really for word lovers. I am a word lover. I studied Latin at university. So I enjoy words and I enjoy description. And of course, you don't put a lot of description in a script. You put a very, very bold stage direction and lots of dialogue, but there isn't, you know, you don't say, oh, the beautiful Georgian house with the red brick and the Virginia creaser and the sweeping drive. You don't get to do any of that. And that's what I wanted to do. So in the back of my head, I just thought, I want to write a book. And I went on and on and on about it until my agent went, why don't you just write one then, instead of going on about it? And this is very common with people. You know, I very often hear people now saying to me, I want to write a book. And the answer to that is, well, do it then. You have to bite the bullet. And eventually I did bite. This is a very long answer, by the way. I did bite the bullet, and spent quite a long time writing the first draft of Honeycoat, which is actually now called A Country Life, A Country Christmas. And I was really lucky. I had a television agent, and she had a contact who was a literary agent and introduced me. And I'm still with both of those agents now today. So that, very, very, very different. Two very, very different ways of writing.
Yeah, and I imagine with writing books, it's more on your own time rather than with scripts where you're always against a deadline.
Yes, and script writing is very collaborative. So you have a team that you're having to work with all the time. You're having, certainly if you're writing soaps or long-running series like something like Holby, you know, you're having to liaise very closely with the writer that's in the episode before you, and you're also having to feed on to the next writer, and then you've got a script editor and a producer and any amount of people interfering, frankly, with what you're doing. Whereas a book, you're just kind of chucked in. And although I could always speak to my editor if I wanted to, along the way, you basically just get on with it on your own. So it's not collaborative until you've delivered it, and then the teamwork does start with you and your editor. And possibly your agent, you know, some people's agents are quite hands-on and creative. But very, very different. And with a script, you're handing over your work to a big team to bring that story to life. So as far as the costumes are concerned, you're giving a very brief description and handing that over to the costume designers to bring that to life. Likewise with the locations. Whereas in a book, you are all of those people. You're the costume person, you're the location manager, you're all of those things, and you're feeding into the imagination of the reader. So you take on all of those roles that in television are done by a huge team, and then you've just got to fire up the reader's imagination. So yeah, it's much more to be done, really, in a way.
Yeah. I'm delighted to say that the questions have started coming thick and fast, which is great. So Lucy says, looking forward to this. My question would be, if you could give one piece of advice for writing, what would it be?
Absolutely, do not procrastinate. Get on with it. Throw yourself into it. I mean, even now, I will do anything on a writing day to avoid writing. It's just part of the thing that it's the fear, isn't it? I think, and everybody feels it. And if a writer says they don't feel it, then either they're not very good or they're lying. Because I think the fear is ultimately what makes you make what you're writing better, because you're constantly querying it and pushing it and changing it and bettering it, hopefully. But there is a kind of awful phase where you're just not. So do it, just do it. And it's the same, you know, my son's in the music business and he's exactly the same. He's composing something at the moment, and I know when he phones me, I'm like, you're just phoning me because you don't want to start work, aren't you? And he's like, yeah. So yeah, really, just, it's okay to feel the fear, but don't let it overwhelm you. Just get something down on the page.
Fantastic advice. So
that would be my biggest.
Yeah. Sue has asked, which is your favorite book, the favorite book that you've written?
Oh gosh.
Do you have a favorite?
That's interesting, isn't it? I think you know, you're fond of your first book, I think, in a way, because that's where you learn if you can do it or not. So I do love it. Was originally called Honeycut, it's now called A Country Wedding, and it was kind of the life I wanted to live. It's set in a Cotswold brewery in a beautiful house with a slightly mad family, very dysfunctional family, all up to no good, and that's kind of it was very me. Do you know? I felt like you are really that's you putting yourself down on the page. I also, the book that was the most fun to write was A Night on the Orient Express, because I did go on the Orient Express to research it, which was, well, I mean, it was a privilege and the most incredible thing I've ever done, I think, really. And it's just been lovely to share that experience with readers, and quite a few of them have gone on to book themselves onto that trip as well afterwards. So that was kind of fun and life-changing and inspiring and inspirational. Yeah. And then I also rather liked How to Find Love in a Bookshop, because it kind of makes everything come full circle. I loved books. I still love books, but that was my safe place as a child. You know, I loved going to bookshops. I was an army child. I was not dragged, but, you know, we moved every 2 years. But somehow bookshops and libraries were very reassuringly the same wherever you were in the country or the world. You know, you could feel at home there. So that's kind of that's why I wrote that book, really, because I think anybody who's a reader feels the same. There's a sort of security that you get when you go into a bookshop, but also that lovely tingling of, oh, what am I going to find? And you can't not buy something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, Cherry experiences that tingling feeling, doesn't she? I wondered if that was that tingling feeling is something that you experience when,
Cherry gets that feeling, the impulse, and she's learned to trust her gut. You know, when she makes the impulse purchase of buying the pub, she's really listening to her stomach and her heart rather than her head. They're kind of, you know, had she gone home that day and thought about it and written down the figures, she probably wouldn't have bought the pub. But because she just has that really strong instinct, which I think the most successful entrepreneurs have, that kind of sixth sense almost, which is, you know, is fantastic. And I'm quite a believer in that. I think when you do something like that, it's something that speaks to you, and you take that risk.
Yeah, I mean, out of interest, have you ever made an impulse purchase of that magnitude?
Not not as big as a pub. I did buy a horse when I was about 22, which was pretty impulsive, given that I didn't have anywhere to keep it. I used to go riding on a Saturday afternoon. It was my kind of escape from, I was working in telly and it was quite pressurised, so I'd go riding on a Saturday. And I had the same horse every week. And one week they said, "Oh, we're selling Marmalade," and I was like, "What?" And then the next thing I know, I bought him.
Oh, wow.
It was one of the best things I ever did, because it changed my life, and I met so many different people, and was much braver, and got out and about. What else would I have been doing? God knows. Don't like to think about it. But yeah, it was fantastic. So, I mean, I was lucky in that I had been left a bit of money by my grandmother, so it was quite nice that that's what I ended up spending the money on. So, yeah, that
is quite a big impulse purchase.
Yeah.
So I'll to continue on with the questions. Thanks everybody for posting questions. These are great. So Ali has said she started reading it and already loves it. Thank you, Veronica. What is next? A sequel?
Oh, well, I do quite often. Actually, this is set. There's a prequel to this, different characters, but set in the same village. So there's a Home from Home is actually set in Rushbrook as well. And what I'm writing next, I'm actually writing a book set in Paris. I can't tell you too much about it yet, but yeah, it's one of my favourite places in the world, and I just thought I really want to set a book there. So I went and in November did some research, because I hadn't, I don't know about anybody else, but COVID kind of made my brain go a bit funny, and I couldn't remember what anything was like. I couldn't remember what Paris smelt like. I couldn't remember what it looked like. So sadly, I had to go and remind myself, which was wonderful. I was just there 4 days on my own and rented a tiny little Airbnb, it was weird, because I just went in and felt at home. It was just like somebody had gone and created my perfect little apartment. Had all these lovely beams and a sucking great chandelier, which was about half the size of the apartment, but just felt really glamorous and sweet. But it was a bit battered around the edges. It wasn't sleek, but it was perfect. And there was even a little desk by the window for me to put my laptop on and write. So it was kind of almost made for me. So so I'm writing that at the moment.
Amazing. I don't suppose you can share the title of the book, or when do you decide that?
Paris. I'm just going to dangle Paris in front of you. That's all I can say at the moment.
Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that with us. Another question I think this is from Jill. Will there be more books based on older women?
I like to write about. I like multi-generational books. So there's usually lots of different age groups in them. There's usually a lot of different characters. And the next one, the central character is, I think, just 50. So she's having a bit of a marriage issue. That's why she runs off to Paris. I'm just very much interested in what happens in later life. I think the stakes are sort of, there's so many books about young women and having babies and finding a man, and it's all been done, but I think life just gets much more interesting as you get older. You still have all of those responsibilities, but then you do get that freedom, and in some ways you're not free of those responsibilities. I don't know if any of you have if you've got children, the worry just gets larger the older they get, because you have no control over what they do. So it's that kind of mixture of what a friend of mine called the tyranny of freedom. Suddenly you've got an empty nest, you can do what you like, but it's actually quite scary. It's not. When you first have your kids, you think, oh my God, I'd give £1 million to be able to go to Barcelona for the weekend or whatever. And then suddenly when you can do that, it's a little bit, because you've sort of lost your momentum and your reason, because you haven't got children making demands on you anymore. So I kind of wanted to reflect that in a way. But also is exciting too, but it's not just a question of waltzing out the door.
Well, that's interesting. As a parent of teenagers, I've envisaged waltzing out the door several times. We've also got Ali, who's asked, who is your favourite author?
Oh gosh, I have so many. I think the author I most admire and would love to have her sort of insight and plotting ability is Daphne du Maurier. I just, her settings are always so beguiling and inviting, and her characters are always so intriguing. It's all very twisty and turny, and yeah, I think she's a genius. I had to write this down because I always go blank when people ask that question. The writer I love at the moment is Stacey Hall. She wrote The Foundling, which I actually listen to on audio in the car if I do long journeys. And I just think she's incredible. It's more historical fiction. So she wrote The Foundling, which is based on the Foundling Hospital in sort of Bloomsbury. And I'm also reading a proof that is written by a writer called Eve Chase, who wrote a book last year called The Glass House, which I think did very well. It was a Richard and Judy. And I think she's one of our best writers at the moment, Eve. She's just got a magical way with words. I call her the word witch. Every sentence is just so beautifully constructed, and her imagery is amazing. And again, her plots are quite twisty and turny. It's quite dark, but with a sort of glamorous edge. So she's definitely one to watch. So I'm reading her proof, which is called The Birdcage, which is set in a big cliff-top house in Cornwall. So a little bit du Maurier-esque, actually. Right. I think my all-time heroine also writer is Elizabeth Jane Howard, who wrote the Cazalet Chronicles. About, I think there's 5 of them now, based around a family. It starts just after the war. So it's looking at the effects that the war has had on a family. And it's again, multi-generational, lots and lots of characters, all intertwined, just following the shenanigans of all of them. But again, fantastic descriptions. You know, she'll just take you into a raspberry cage before tea time, and you're just there. You can smell the raspberries as they're being picked or whatever. And she also breaks all the rules. I mean, in her first book, there's one sentence that is almost 2 pages long, which is incredible. I mean, it just she's very clever, or was very clever. So yeah, Elizabeth Jane Howard, I think.
Fantastic. I've made notes of everybody you've mentioned there, so I'll have lots to read over the next months. So Lynn has asked, do you write on paper with a pen or pencil, or do you use a keyboard?
Okay, so when I'm starting out, I have a notebook. So I'll just show you. This is my Paris one. Actually, that's got a lot of vocabulary in it as well, because I'm doing French conversation classes. So I feel like I should be putting proper French into it, okay, bits of French. So yeah, I'll start jotting down character ideas, location ideas, plot ideas with a notebook and pencil, because I find I create better that way. Then I will plot it out. I'll put down everything that I know I want to happen in the book, and then I'll try and get some sort of shape to it. I'll try and work out what the end is. I'll put in all of the big plot points that I want, the big twists or the big revelations or the big quite often I do 2 timelines as well, so I'll make sure that those fit together quite well. And what I did this time, actually, because I've got a new editor, so I did plan out the whole book, sort of almost chapter by chapter, and send her that, and that has really helped. I've always winged it a little bit, wrote quite a lot of it down, but then just sort of started and saw what happened. But I found that having done the really, really detailed plan, it's actually been really helpful, because I know where I'm going, so I can start. I think your subconscious does a lot of the work for you. quite often I'll wake up in the night and have worked out a plot problem. So I think if you do plan it out, then your subconscious starts doing a lot of the work for you. So having been a bit of a winger, I'm now well into after 20 books actually planning it.
So if you wake in the middle of the night, do you have a notebook where you make notes like at 4 a.m. or something, or do you remember it?
I grab my phone and just put it into notes, which is,
right.
then you have to make sure you put your phone down and not look on Instagram.
Yeah.
Yeah, because quite often if you wake up in the morning, you just forgot it. Yeah, so I'll just do it quick. And then you wake up in the morning and go, what? What was that all about? Yeah.
Lovely. So we've got Francine has asked, how do you get your inspiration for your novels? Do you use parts of events that you have experienced yourself, your family, or your friends? And how many hours a day do you write?
Oh gosh. The ideas come from absolutely everywhere. I've got my beady little eyes open all the time and my ears flapping. I quite often eavesdrop on people. Hotels are a great place to go. So you think, oh, I don't think you two should be here together or whatever. And then, you start making up the backstory for them. And visual things give me lots of inspiration. So I take a lot of photos if I'm out and about. If I see a house, houses are really inspiring to me. And quite often the books are based, there will be a big house at the center of it. So houses, even just when I was in Paris, I saw 2 years ago, I saw this girl walking down the street who was sort of in this almost like a wedding dress with her hair piled up on her head and sunglasses and Greek sandals. And she just amazed, you just see somebody like that and a story comes whizzing along the street with them. So yeah, I just keep looking, listening, reading magazines very often. I just love the front of Country Life again with all the houses in it, paintings, music. Books are very much about engaging people's emotions. So if I hear a song that is particularly kind of heartrending or emotional or interesting, I'll look at the dynamic of that and think, why is that making me feel like that? Because sometimes I'll listen to songs and I'll just think, God, I wish I could write a book that made readers feel the way that song makes me feel. And what was the end of that question?
So the second part of the question was, how many hours a day do you write? It'd actually be interesting to know if you do a sort of 9 to 5 or if there's a particular time of the day where you feel most creative.
Well, in theory, yes, I do work most days. I have to treat it like a business. It is a business, really. So I have to be business-like, and I think you have to be disciplined to a certain extent. I write a book a year, and I'm not always necessarily writing. I'll be doing other things. So, for example, at the moment, I'm trying to finish the book set in Paris at the same time as this book's being published. So that has been quite challenging because there's a lot of events like this, features to write. There's a lot. It's not just about writing these days, that you have to have a brand and a profile and work hard at getting yourself out there because it's very competitive. So you just got to keep ahead of the game and find different ways of reaching readers, really, across, and keeping your social media going. I mean, I could literally spend all day doing that part of the job and never write a word. So it's I get that balance and thinking, and every now and again I have to say to my team, guys, you need to leave me alone for a couple of weeks because I need to actually write. Otherwise, there isn't going to be anything to promote. So yeah, it's just keeping that balance going.
And I suppose it's such a huge change from when you started out writing. Even the way you write obviously has changed, but also the way you now communicate with your readers and social media, and I suppose reviews and comments, you see much more of those via social media. It's a complete change. I mean, does that Has that affected you, other than how time consuming it is?
Yes, when I look back to when I started writing, I think the internet had been invented when I started novels.
Okay.
But I think my first couple of novels I printed out and delivered as a manuscript. And you would get actual letters from I was going to say viewers, readers, which you very rarely get an actual letter now. And I don't know, I'm sure everybody feels the same. My concentration is really not what it used to be. And I absolutely blame, looking at your phone, scrolling through Instagram. And I have to do it as part of my job, which is, it's a bit like saying, give up drinking, but you have to go to the pub and have one glass of wine, but basically don't drink. So, to say to a writer, right, just ignore social media and get on with your work, but you have to go in and check in on all of them and respond to. It's very difficult to manage. And yeah, they were simpler times, and you weren't as. I think it's because it is so competitive, and you're very aware of what everybody else is doing and how well everybody else is doing, and everybody can read my Amazon reviews. I can read everybody else's Amazon reviews. And it takes a tough person not to go, why she got more 5-star reviews than me? You're only human. You'd question yourself, and it is very difficult. So you are up against everybody else all the time, and yeah, it's hard. It's tough.
Yeah. And that's a side, I suppose, as readers, I certainly don't think of that side, that you can see how everyone else is doing, and it's very hard not to compare yourself and wonder, well, what have they got that I haven't got? You know what I mean? It's
exactly that. And it's all out there for everybody to see. Everything's measured absolutely down to the last, book that you sold.
Yeah.
So you do have to be quite tough, really, in a way.
So Marie has asked, how do you build your story from a small idea? And I know you've talked a bit about that, but there might be something you've got to add to that.
Yes. It's a sort of combination of looking at all the different characters and how they're feeding off each other and influencing each other, and then looking at what their individual problems are. So you have to kind of work out each character's, what each character wants to achieve by the end of the novel, and what obstacles are in their way. So yeah, it is quite good because I've got 3 heroines in this, so they're all at different stages in their life. So Cherry, and I kind of turned it around in that the Cherry, who's nearly 70, is actually having marriage issues, and then Maggie, her daughter, who's 45, is actually a widow. So I was kind of flipping the expectation there. So obviously Maggie's kind of, I think she's been widowed for about 2 years, and everybody's, well, have you met anybody else yet? So she's feeling like she needs to get back into the dating scene. And then Rose is the granddaughter, just still a bit traumatized by her father's death, and is a little bit lost and very anxious. So they've all got their own personal things that they've got to overcome, and then it's weaving that all into their combined challenge of turning the pub round and making it somewhere that people want to go. So yeah, it's a kind of layering process, I suppose. I kind of have different ideas for different characters, and then see, would that have an effect on so she knows that piece of information. Does she tell the other person that or not? So it's kind of like doing those plats, that French plats that have got lots of, it's kind of like that. Weave another bit in, and then make sure it all makes sense and is perfect. And then sometimes you start writing, and a character that you think is sort of insignificant will suddenly come into a scene and turn everything upside down unexpectedly, and that's actually fun. That's when writing is fun, and that's when the magic starts. And that's why I'm not that keen on over planning it, because you've got to make allowances for that rogue character that just comes in and goes, actually, this is what's going to happen.
Right. Wow. It's just so interesting. It's almost like you've got to leave the door open for the magic to enter in a way.
A little and it's never the same. No, you can't use the same process for every, well, I can't. It's always, sometimes I write chronologically, sometimes I'll write, you know, if I'm doing a 2 timeline story, I'll write one strand and then the other, and then weave them together at the ends. Sometimes you sort of think, oh, I really, really, really want to write that scene now. If you're a bit stuck and a bit bogged down, it's quite tempting to leap ahead and go and write this sort of the big party scene where something dramatic happens. Or yeah, so there isn't. I'm a bit haphazard sometimes, but you know, I've been doing it a long time, and I was trained in telly, so I'm never going to go off and do something that messes it all up. I kind of know what I'm doing.
Out of interest, of the 3 main characters, Cherry, Maggie, and Rose, do you see yourself more in one than any of the others, or is there a bit of you in all of them?
Oh, that's a good question. I think each of them is somebody I'd like to be rather than they are me. I love to write people that I would find inspiring or motivating, or people I would admire. And Cherry's the kind of person I would like to be when I'm that age, definitely. Still doing it, still not saying no to anything, and taking risks, and so I think I kind of more write people that I want to be rather than reflect who I am. But I guess there's a little bit of me, you know, they have my values, you know, I'm not going to represent somebody that doesn't basically have my core beliefs and isn't at the root of it a good person. Not as a heroine anyway. I mean, there could very easily be minor characters who are not as nice.
And I think it's interesting, you mentioned earlier, you've sort of turned things a little, because of course it's Maggie that's widowed, and Cherry out of the 3 generations is the one sort of trailblazing still, which I think is really interesting. And actually a comment from Lucy is, I'm so pleased that you are writing about older ladies. We are so underrepresented. It's amazing to see an older lady who, as you say, is still excited by the world, still willing to take risks and do new things. So yeah, she's really inspiring character.
Oh no, I love it. And you know, I've got more friends of my mother's. My mother's 83, and still, honestly, if we went out together, you'd choose her. She's stunning. She's just, you know, slim and gorgeous and chic and all of the above. And you know, she has friends who are still running incredible businesses, and doing fantastic things. And yeah, I'm not seeing that on the telly or in books really. So it's time. Where, you know, we get more interesting as we get older, I think. Definitely. Yeah. Of course we do. We've done so much.
I agree. I totally agree with that. So we're having, thanks everybody for all the amazing comments and amazing questions. Yvonne has asked, whose books do you enjoy reading and which writers inspire you, which you've already covered. When you have done your plan, does it ever surprise you and change? And I think you've talked a bit about that as well, about the magic. You know, you sometimes a character who was sort of had a small part suddenly takes over, but yeah, do you find the plot even can change as you go along?
Yes, sometimes, because it is a draft process as well. So when I deliver my first draft, I know that it's not perfect. So quite often it can change quite dramatically between the first and the second draft. Not always, but once my editor has come into the process, you know, they can have quite strong opinions, and sometimes a couple. So which book was it? It was A Wedding at the Beach Hut. Do you know what? The day I delivered it, I knew that one of the story strands was just not quite right. And I had and I delivered it, and then I emailed Harriet, my editor, then, and said, that whole strand has got to go. Before you even start with your comments, I'm telling you, this has got to go. And actually, all of her observations, that cutting that out solved it, but obviously I had to replace it. So I dropped 40,000 words out of that draft, which is definitely nearly half a book.
Wow. Yeah.
But sometimes you have to write the wrong thing in order to write the right thing. It's weird, if that doesn't sound pretentious. Yeah, it just,
Yeah.
it was a little bit too dark, and it didn't really quite belong in the book. Yeah, anyway, I did it somehow.
Hard to do. So Barbara's asked, how do you keep yourself real in all the whirl of comments about what you do? Does that, or could that, inspire another story? And do you ever have to hide away to lick your wounds if you see something particularly hard to hear?
Well, as I just said, I've been really lucky with this last lot of reviews. I think it's really important to one of the most important things about writing, I think this is probably the second thing I'd tell somebody, is to learn to take criticism, not be precious. You know, if you're working with a team, you have to be able to listen to what they're saying and take it on board. And yeah, nobody likes being told that what they've written isn't perfect and fabulous. It is difficult. Television really toughened me up for that. Oh my goodness, yeah. You're quite brutally treated in television. Nobody pulls their punches. It's like, no, this isn't good enough. You know, they're not kind about how they respond to what you've done necessarily, because there isn't time. You know, they don't have time to sort of go, oh, let's take her out for lunch and break the news to her gently. That's like, so that has toughened me up quite a lot. But yeah, I'd far rather read a 5-star review than a 1-star one. But I think it's really important to read the criticisms and think, do they have a point? Are there too many characters? Is it too complicated? Is it not satisfying? You know, whatever that, if something comes back more than once or 2 or 3 times, then you have to listen to it. It's a bit like if you're selling a house and you've got viewers coming in and the feedback every time is, you know, the view from the garden is awful, then you have to accept the fact that the view from the garden is awful, and that's why it's not selling. So it's, if the same thing keeps coming back, yeah, you need to address it. But yeah, it's not always pleasant.
So Lucy has asked, how do you get a book in front of a publisher or editor? So how do you start the process? I mean, obviously now you mentioned you've been with the same people for many years, but it must be very daunting when you write your first book to take it out there. How was that process for you?
Yes, of course, it's terribly daunting. Yeah, it's nerve-wracking. And things have changed a lot since I started out, so I'm not necessarily an expert in how to go about it now. But I think getting an agent is pretty important, because most of the big publishers won't look at a book unless it's come through an agent. Although there are, you know, there's lots of other opportunities. There's self-publishing, and then there's companies like Bookature that you can submit directly to them without an agent. So there are pathways that you can go down that don't necessarily have an agent. But if you want the traditional book deal, and sort of distribution in bookshops and supermarkets, etc., then yeah, an agent is the way to go. And I think it's about looking at what else. It's that really difficult combination of looking at what's out there and what's doing well, but not jumping on a bandwagon, and being brave enough to have your own distinctive voice within the market. I mean, nobody can predict what the next big thing is necessarily, but you do have to get know your market, know who's doing well and why, and understand why those particular books are responding to readers, and understand in yourself what it is you want your reader to feel at the end of a book. What, you know, do you want them to feel uplifted, which is, you know, that's what I want to do. I want to give people hope and make them sigh with satisfaction. Or do you want them to think, God, I didn't see that end coming, that's amazing, you know, an incredible twist. Do do you want them to feel sort of intellectually stimulated? That would be more of a literary, do you want them to feel as if they've gone on some very complex journey? All of those, you have to decide what and why you're writing, I think.
Yeah.
And who you are in that.
So you do follow sort of trends as well. I heard you talk about that. So you would follow trends in, what people are buying, what the latest trend is in writing. And
I think it's important to look at it, but not necessarily follow it, but just kind of, it's really, really difficult. And everybody's trying, publishers are trying to do it, agents are trying to do it, retailers are trying to do it. You can't force it. So I try to keep ahead of the curve. I like to set the trends, but that's hard. But yeah, you just think, what might people be looking for? Say post-COVID, and that I'm quite lucky because actually now people are looking for a comforting family read where everything. Bad things happen, but basically the setup is secure because we've all been, shaken up like a bag of jelly babies, haven't we? Yeah. So it's quite timely. Obviously, I didn't predict that. I didn't know that COVID was coming, but I did feel like people would want. I didn't put COVID in the book, for example. I didn't think people would want to see that word at all.
Yeah.
Or have people having to wear masks in the pub, or whatever. Just wanted normality
or escapism, or both, really.
A little bit of escapism,
yeah.
Achievable escapism. That's what I like to, something that we can all go to a lovely pub in Somerset. It's a lovely experience, and everybody can do that.
Yeah. So Marie has asked, how is the material worth decided? The price? How is the price of the book decided?
Gosh.
And actually, I'll add to that a little question of my own. How is the cover decided? Who creates the cover? How is that process as well? Gosh. So the price and the cover.
The price. I have no idea how that. Back in the day, there was a thing called the net book agreement, and books were all set at the same price. Now all the retailers will sell it at different prices. So Sainsbury's might sell it at £5.99, then Amazon will price match that. It's a very complex, very complicated, very scientific, I'm sure, process that I don't really understand, and that's kind of the publisher's job. They work all of that out, and so this is my first hardback for a long time. So some writers just go straight to paperback if they're commercial, but then when you've got quite a solid fan base who the publishers think will want a hardback and will invest in a hardback, so that's where I'm at the moment. So obviously that's a higher price. Oh gosh, I don't know enough about it to be very informative on the subject. And there's lots of different ways that, say for example, the digital books are much cheaper, so people will drop the price to 99p, and there's a lot of readers who now will only pay 99p for a book, for example. So there's so many different pockets of the readerships, and so many different types of reader who will spend different amounts of money or have different buying habits. So they might buy a hardback of their favorite author, or they might absolutely love hardbacks and just want those because they want beautiful books to put on their shelves. And then there's others who will just only spend 99p on a digital thing. So there's so many different habits, and I think the publishers are all trying to work out how they can capture all of those different habits in different ways and make a bestseller.
Yeah.
Now there was another part to that question.
The second part was around the cover. How is the cover designed and decided?
That's a process, which I have. I think if you've got a good relationship with your publisher, then you'll have lots of conversations backwards and forwards. But it's basically the publishers. That is part of their remit and part of their job, is to make a cover that's attractive and makes a reader want to pick it up and buy it. And they work very closely with the retailers, so they'll have quite an influence on, I'm exaggerating slightly, but say, for example, Tesco's might say, we really only like yellow books at the moment. It's a slight exaggeration, but the publishers will know what the trends are, what the fashion is, what's selling well, and they'll talk to you. When I'm sort of halfway through a book, I'll start sending off images that I think represent the book and the emotions in the book and the feel of the book and where it's set, for example. So I'll start sort of feeding inspiration, mood boards, like I might create something on Pinterest for my editor, who will then brief the art department. And, you know, we'll have conversations about how we want to trap the reader, and what it is we want to evoke in the cover. And then they might come up with 5 or 6 suggestions, and we'll all sit around a table and have a look at them and think, well, that works, that doesn't, do we like that colour, should we change that? And then just silly things like how big the author's name is. Now, I feel very grand because my name's quite big now. But if you're a debut author, your name wouldn't be particularly big because you're not well enough for that to. Whereas now, that might be one of the reasons that people will pick it up and buy it. So yeah, I mean, that cover has to do a lot of things. It has to be visually enticing. It has the title again is really important as well, and that can take absolutely ages to work out. It's ask any writer. That's one. Either you come up with a title straight away and it's perfect, or it's a really torturous, awful, ghastly process where everybody's throwing ideas around and arguing a lot. And then you have quotes on the cover. It's quite a long and involved process, and then they work out whether to. So that's beautiful. That's lovely in gold and a little bit raised. And also, I don't know if anybody's got a copy of this, but it's got a slight finish on it that makes it feel soft. So it's very tactile. So it's not quite sticky. It's almost like silk. It's weird. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into a cover. And of course, the in thing now, which I haven't got, might have to have a tantrum, is when it's called sprayed edges, when they put a colour on the edges of the pages and an image. That's the in thing now. But
it's very interesting. It does sound like a long process, and it sounds very collaborative as well. So everyone's involved.
Yeah, it is. And this is a bit different, a different look for me. It was quite a brave. I mean, I kind of want to step into that picture, and that's what I want my covers to do. I want my reader to go, oh, I want to go there. That's what my books are about. I just want my reader to be in my world.
Yeah. So this is really interesting. This was from a member who posted actually in our community section before the event. I've recently finished the impulse purchase and would like to know if you're a keen cook, as the descriptions of food and menus are mouth-watering, which is something that I was struck by as well. So it'd be really interesting to hear if you are a keen cook.
I am. I'm an obsessive cook, I'd say. Yeah. No, I love cooking. I love food, and I love the drama of mealtime. I think that's probably why I have so much food in my books, because I think, when people are all around the table, either as a family or in a romantic setting or whatever, it's just so often those things that happen are taking place while people are eating. And yeah, I have a lot of food writers who I really admire, and I think writing about food is really difficult, and to do it well is a huge skill. So if you look at people like, Nigella, of course, Nigel Slater, my absolute heroine is Veronica Henry. I'm not related to her, by the way. But when you read how they describe what they cook and and the results of what they're eating, it's so evocative and so vivid. And that's how I train myself on the side, that's how I learn. Very often is by reading cookery books or reading food writing. Yeah. And I actually did, during lockdown, I did an online cookery course with Leiths, because I was on my own. And it just gave me something it gave a bit of structure to my week that wasn't just writing. So each week I had to do 2 or 3 modules. So you do like the omelette course, or the chicken stock course, or the fish filleting section. And that was brilliant. I learnt so much. It just kind of raised my game a little bit, made me slightly more professional in the kitchen.
Fantastic. I think we've all had a lot more time in the kitchen in the last 2 years than before that.
Yeah.
And I'm very interested, because it was in your press release about making a killer Negroni. What top tip you can share for that?
Oh, I think good ingredients. So a nice vermouth, because Negroni is gin, vermouth, and Campari. Obviously, Campari just is what it is, but if you can get a really nice, good French vermouth and a nice gin, and make sure they're really nice, chilled. You can put them in the freezer a little bit beforehand, so they're really cold. And then a lovely, big, thick slice of orange in with it. My chosen specialised subject is Negronis.
I can tell. Yeah, sounds amazing. Oh, it's been so fantastic.
Thank you.
I'm really sorry to say it's literally coming to the end of this. And it's just been fantastic. Thanks so much, Veronica, for joining us this evening and answering so many of our members' questions. It's been really enjoyable and really, really interesting. And I think we've all learned lots as well. And of course, huge thanks to all the members. And all the great questions, really loads of questions. Yeah, and everyone started posting questions early on as well, which was fantastic. So yeah, thanks to everybody, and have a lovely evening. And just to say, as always, once the event is closed, unfortunately, it closes down for everyone. It's just the nature of the event. So apologies to anyone who might have liked to stay on for a chat. So yeah, thank you all again, and good night. And I hope you can all join us for another Restless event. And huge thanks to Veronica. I have almost finished the book. I can honestly say I can't wait to go to bed just to continue reading it. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.
It's been really lovely. Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye-bye.